Hello and welcome to the Women at the Top podcast interview series. My name is Regina Barr and I'm the founder of the Women at the Top Network, and I'll be your host today. And for those of you who don't know us, Women at the Top is a community of like-minded women who share the Watt vision and mission. And our goal, simply put, is to empower aspiring women to lead. And we do this in a couple of ways, by providing training, information, and connections. I'm so excited that joining me today is Whitney Emanuel, CFP and CEO of Whitney Wealth Group. And before we get started with our conversation today, I always like to give a little bit of background. So I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Whitney. Whitney has been a financial advisor since 2011, and she began at Ameriprise. An even bigger leap in 2019 led her to leave the big box financial world, and she branched out to start her own Whitney Wealth Group in 2016. She is now completely independent. Whitney works with values-driven executives and business owners that want to know specifically how to plan for their goals and are motivated to achieve them. As a single working parent with her own business, she understands what it feels like to balance priorities and does exactly that for her hardworking clients, many of whom are also caregivers. So on that note, welcome to our call today, Whitney.
Thank you, Regina. I appreciate it.
I have to tell you, we've talked in the past, and you know I have a special passion for single working moms. My mom was a single working mom, and I was just telling somebody recently that when I was a kid, she worked at night, and I took care of my brothers, and I was literally 9 years old. And in the summer, because I was very fearful because we had been broken into and things like that, I would not even open our windows, and we did not have air conditioning. So and then I was telling my husband that I was telling somebody that, and he's like, oh, well, what has changed? And I was like, well, I do open the windows now. So anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. And what's interesting is in 1972, there were just a little over 400,000 women-owned businesses right here in the U.S., and also interesting is that until 1988, so I had already graduated high school, women needed a male relative to co-sign if they wanted to apply for a business loan. And I got to tell you, that just floors me.
Alarming.
And then, yes, very alarming. And then fast forward to 2019, and women-owned small businesses represented 42% of all U.S. businesses. So that was a major milestone. And today, there are over 13 million women-owned businesses and counting. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start your business.
Sure. So as you mentioned in my bio, started at Ameriprise, and I really didn't even know what it entailed to be a financial advisor. I just got recruited out of college. And so I didn't even think about owning a business at the time. But when I started working with my clients, I learned that I loved the work. I loved helping people do things that they know they need to do, but they don't know how. They don't have the knowledge or the resources really on how to move forward on these things. So just helping people and coaching people through it. Now, I was a few years into my first gig at Ameriprise, and they were making changes. And I didn't like the changes that they were making. And I was just speaking with someone about this earlier today in a meeting. And I really wanted to control the planning process and the client experience from start to finish. And I wasn't able to do that anymore. And that really bothered me. And so I had just had my daughter, Zuri. So I had a newborn. I was the primary breadwinner. And I just decided to leave, not really knowing where it would take me, but knowing that I couldn't stay there.
Yes.
And so I had a few years at New York Life, and then after New York Life is when I went independent, completely independent. But even at New York Life for a few years there, that was good training because I didn't have any type of base salary. I was still running my own business within their framework. So that was good preparation to go completely on my own later in 2019.
So I'll just tell you, because I'm chuckling when you said that you went, you took that interim Semper for complete independence when you had your daughter. And I always tell people it's always a good time to start a business, whereas sometimes people will say, it's never a good time. It's always a good time,
Always a
no
good
matter.
time. There's never a perfect time to do it. And if you have a good business plan, you could pretty
You can
much,
take
and then, you have the KPIs to track
Yeah.
as you're growing, you can do it.
Yes, totally agree. So, and excited that you took that leap and that you're very successful. So let's talk a little bit about your company with Whitney Wealth Group. And you help individuals create wealth management plan. And you also have a passion to work with small business owners. So when you think about other women, not unlike ourselves, what is the number one challenge that women business owners face from your perspective?
I would say that it is taking care of themselves. So it's taking care of the business, taking care of the family, taking care, right? All these obligations. And oftentimes for women, our business is our baby in many ways. And so often we put all our time and resources into that. But so what we don't take money out of the business, we also don't take time away from the business. And so that is what I would say is probably the biggest challenge that I see. Women just, they work because they want to take care of it. They want to be responsible. They have a really, they tend toward being responsible, I'd say more so than men. And so needing to almost caretake their business and everyone else then on top of the business. So then they don't really have much time for themselves or their own financial plan or their own lives outside of their business.
Yeah, I would agree. When you were saying that, I got this image in my head, and I'm maybe dating myself a little bit, but the image I got was Kramer from Seinfeld, like coming like screeching to a halt into a doorway, like everything flying around him. And I feel like sometimes, that's how it is with women, right? We're like getting from one thing to the next, and can hardly breathe. And I will tell you, I've been in business, celebrated 20 years myself, and I still struggle with that. And I've been going through a process of what can I say no to so that I can say yes to myself.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's very hard because we women love to help and we don't like to say no. And so I think that's an important lesson for women as well.
Indeed.
So you and I, we've talked a little bit in the past, and we've had conversations about women and money. And we've talked a little bit about women having a different relationship with money and their finances than men, and that they may not take as many risks. And as I'm saying that out loud, I am right now thinking of my husband and his relationship with money and how I view money. So I'm just chuckling to myself.
Yeah.
So what advice can you offer to women about their finances?
Sure. Well, I first want to give women kudos when it comes to investing in general, because women actually earn a higher rate of return on average in their investments than men.
Woohoo! I gotta say it, right?
And the reason for that is because we're more slow and steady wins the race. That's more our approach with investing, whereas men are always chasing returns, generally speaking. And so you can't chase returns and you cannot time the market, but men keep trying because of the ego. And women just more set and forget it. And that really is the best way to do that, strategically reallocating over time, but not trying to chase anything. So that's the first thing. So you're not doing anything wrong, right? If you're not chasing the return or getting all this extra advice to day trade, it doesn't really help you in the end. But secondly, when it comes to risk, there's also risk when it comes to, even if you think about investing in general, some women don't want to put money. For example, I have with female clients who they have way more money in cash than men. And this cash isn't really earning anything, but it's safe. And so just helping you to change, not all of it. You don't have to invest all the cash, but just to change a couple of the buckets from cash to investing. Just investing a little bit more than keeping it all in cash is probably one of the best things that you can do long-term to outpace inflation. And so cash is king isn't necessarily the case, because cash is losing money to inflation, and this hyperinflation environment that we're in doesn't seem to be going away. It seems to be remaining. And so the best way to beat that is by investing the money.
So what I'm hearing you say, which I have a similar comment, is women tend to be relational, take their time, maybe do a little bit of a better job of due diligence, and that pays off for them over time. And men tend to be a little more transactional, which is what I see in my husband and our own relationship. And then the other side, it's, you don't have to jump off the cliff in terms of risk, but maybe it's you take a step up the ladder and a little step up the ladder, and you develop some confidence.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
Oftentimes humans, not just women, do this. We're very polarized in our thinking. It has to be all or nothing. And there are so many compromises and meeting down the middle that you can do with investing that people don't really think about, because they think it's all I have to invest everything that I have, or I don't invest at all.
I like that you said that it does not have to be all or nothing, and that even those small changes can help, like you said, either beat inflation or, help improve the overall return for someone over time. That's
true.
great.
In fact, I'll run analyses where I show someone where they throw in $100,000 of cash at once in 1 year, or they do $5,000 a year, and the outcome is actually the same in the end.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it doesn't really make much of a difference.
That's interesting. So I know that you've done some work on a series of videos that focus on retirement planning for business owners. And I really think it's so important because the reasons that you said earlier, we tend to focus outwardly on everyone but ourselves, and we tend to put ourselves last. So I have a couple of questions related to retirement planning. So first one is, do most business owners actually have a retirement plan?
Not most, no. I would say, though, if someone has a sizable business, $1 million or more in revenue, they probably do have some type of retirement plan. But I would say those smaller businesses, $1 million or less, that's where it's hit or miss as far as whether or not you have a retirement plan in place.
Okay. So I want to ask you a question about retirement planning in general. What do you think would prevent a business owner from starting a retirement plan, especially if they have some level of success?
Yeah. If they have employees, one of the biggest objections that I hear is that their employees aren't going to participate. So why even offer it? So that's a very common one. Secondly, if maybe there is a consultant and they are the only employee, right? And there aren't any employees, it's just a matter of cash flow and not planning appropriately. And so then they just don't feel like they have the cash to do it. Oftentimes those people aren't necessarily on payroll. And so it's easier when you're on payroll to set up a retirement plan. But if you are not on payroll and you're just receiving distributions from your business, it's a lot harder to set up a retirement plan because you don't have that pay structure set up for you.
It's interesting that you said that because I know you had that corporate experience. I came out of corporate. I was a corporate marketing executive. And I used to tell people that when I started my business, I was incorporated in many ways. And I wasn't referring to the incorporation of my business, but I literally, to this day, still do, for example, expense reports because I like the paper trail. Yeah. I never treated my business checking account as just an open checking account. And I always paid myself a salary every month. So then I was paying for retirement and some other things because that's what I knew from a structure standpoint. So I felt like that was a benefit to me having had the corporate experience because it forced me to put some processes in place that honestly I might not have done otherwise.
Yep. Structure is freedom. That's what I always tell my clients.
Oh my gosh. I used to tell all the creative people that worked with me who wanted to do everything their own way, structure can be liberating. That's what I would tell them. So you and I have a similar philosophy there. That's awesome. So I always like to ask, because this is a podcast, basically by and for women, Women at the Top. Have you found any differences other than what we've already talked about between how men and women business owners invest?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually think that men invest more. They have a different style, but they do invest more. Another thing that I have found is that men invest more in real estate.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed.
Okay.
And it's actually there are more men in commercial real estate specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of money in commercial real estate. And I think that men like new ideas. They tend to like change, and they're like these exciting options. Whereas women, as we've discussed, are more like the steady wins the race. And so they more stick with what they know. So those are some of the key differences. I would say, though, I have better relationships with my female clients. Sorry if any of my men hear this, but it's just true. It's true because they recognize that they are not experts in this, and so they defer to me. And then even I've had the male clients sometimes say, well, what this rate of return? And then they're quoting wrong numbers. So there's like this overconfidence, like they know more or something, know something that I don't know. So there's like a distrust with men, which is unfortunate because, of all the work that I do, but I just think it is a disposition.
Yes. Well, I'm married to an engineer, and you want to talk about distrust. I mean, now, if you're building a bridge, I tell my husband, absolutely be worried and negative and distrustful of everything, because we do not want another bridge to fall in our state. He doesn't do that kind of engineering, but that's kind of what I tell him.
Right.
But I'll tell you something that he said to me, which really kind of cracked me up and I think illustrates what you're saying. So my husband, and it's kind of in a way a compliment to me. I started out in mutual funds many, many moons ago, but decided I wanted to move into the marketing side. Then I decided I wanted to move to the people side of the business. So relatively recently, he said to me, why don't we use a financial advisor? Why don't you just manage our money? And I was like silent. And in my head, a lot of conversation like, what are you, nuts? Do you really think that I want to manage? What makes you think I want to do this?
Right.
I want to manage the relationship, the big picture. And so I didn't say all of that. And I just said, hon, I said, the reason I don't want to is I don't have all the skill sets for that. That's not my skill set. I have many great skill sets, but that's not the one. That's not, I mean, it could be one of them if I want it. It's not one. And so he just was kind of like, he had to think about it. He was like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? It was just like, I explained to him, no, I want to work on what are our goals and what kind of return do we want? And I want to have a relationship with someone that I trust who's going to advise me on what we should be doing. And he was just someplace completely different than where I was at. So luckily, I make those decisions and I am not managing our portfolio. So I'm just chuckling when you were saying that. I was like, oh my goodness, you've been looking inside my house lately. So,
well, another thing too that I think people don't realize is you could be smart enough to do this, but do you have the capacity and the time and the bandwidth to manage it?
And the answer for me is no.
Yeah,
with a capital N.
Sometimes people are retired. Like I have these clients they're younger, but then they have a dad or grandfather who did all this investing, but they were retired. They had the luxury of time.
Right.
You don't have the luxury of time, and then also the desire to keep up on the market and tax laws and things that affect your portfolio, then it's best to outsource it.
Absolutely agree with that. Do what you're good at or what you love. And I think that therein lies success. So I've worked with and networked with lots of women that own their businesses over the years. And I do think it's incredibly important to have a strong network of support with your peers, because otherwise, we women, I always joke around, behind every strong man, there's a woman. Behind every strong woman, there's a team of women. So do you belong to a networking group? And if you do, what have you learned?
Sure. So since I started growing my own business when I was at New York Life, I've been a part of many. I was a part of NABO, National Association of Women Business Owners. I also served on a few boards, which does serve as networking. And then right before 2020, I pulled back from everything that I was doing and reassessed what I was going to do for networking. And then over this last year, I joined Team Women. And then I also joined Coalition 9, which is like a peer-to-peer advisory and networking group. So those are the two. And then I'm also a part of, it's not networking, but it serves to be relationship building, which ends up being networking, is the Minneapolis Women's Rotary.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah, it was the first women's Rotary in the nation because they started it when women weren't allowed to be in Rotary. So that's pretty cool.
Rogue. They're going rogue. Love it. What would you say you've learned for your networks?
It's a really good question. I have learned a lot. That's a very loaded question. I learned that I don't know everything and that it's always good to ask questions and not to pretend like you know what people are talking about. I've learned too that you can create amazing friendships through networking. It may not lead to business, but some of the best friends that I've found in networking. And yeah, those are probably my two biggest takeaways from the networking that I've done throughout the years.
Love it. And I would agree with you on that. So let's talk a little bit about mentoring or using a business coach. And I always tell my clients to have a mentor, be a mentor, or self-mentor, right? Because we can read and train and go to classes and do other things. So what is your experience with mentoring, whether it's giving or receiving?
I have hired coaches. So back when I was at Ameriprise, actually, this was before I was in the business world, just as an employee advisor, I had a mentor, unofficially, but he was the gentleman who was in charge of all the planning, financial planning. And so he was a huge mentor to me, which is why financial planning and fee-based financial planning is a big focus to my practice. So he was one. Number two, I've hired coaches. I hired a coach in one of my transitions to go independent. I hired a coach that I worked with for 2 years, and that was like a CEO roundtable. That was Buffy Bleasy was my first coach, and then the second coach was Jeff Redman, and that was with Big Roundtable. And then right now, I took a step back from that, and now I'm in Coalition 9, which is more peer-to-peer rather than working with one coach. We have a facilitator in that group, but I really like that model. It makes sense right now. Although I did just read an article, Regina, that was talking about knowing yourself, and maybe I need a coach to get a one-on-one. I just find it so helpful. They really help me ask questions that I wouldn't normally ask about my business, get me in that stage of wonder, like what if, those what if questions that I think we so often miss when we're working in the business. I have mentored, I recruited women into the business and mentored them. And then I do, not in the business side, I do a lot of mentoring in my faith community. So I spent a lot of time doing mentorship there.
That's great. Like I said, be a mentor, have a mentor, or a self-mentor. I just think it's so important because as a mentor, I don't know about you, but when I've mentored, sometimes I feel like I learn more than what I'm giving. And then you kind of feel like, oh, wow, am I really, what value am I giving? Because I feel like sometimes I'm taking it all away, especially when I'm mentoring younger folks, right? Because they bring a completely different perspective and different mindset. And so I just, and I've mentored people across the realm, young to older than myself. So it's all good. So I want to talk a little bit about balance. And business owners are busy people. And sometimes, life balance, if you believe in it, right, can be really challenging. So what do you do to create some balance in your life?
So I've done a lot of work on this. It's really important to me. So I've identified, and I actually teach a class on this as well, on life management. So because really, if you think about it, what shows your values and what is most important to you? Your time and your money. Mm-hmm. And so the time piece is what you're talking about now. And so if you look at your calendar, you can see what's important to you. And so what I did was I worked backwards and I said, okay, here are my top priorities in my life. It's my family, my daughter, Zuri, it's my business, it's my faith, it's my health, right? And self-care. So those are all things that need to happen in my life for my life to be functioning well. And so then I think about how much time am I willing to spend on each of those things. And ministry is another piece. So if I think about all that, then I put like time in assignments into each of those priorities for the week. And then, of course, sleep. Can't forget about that one.
Oh, yeah.
And so 6 to 8 hours or 7 to 9, I've heard both every night. But all that to say is that then I color code my calendar according to my priorities. And so when I look at my calendar for the week, I know what I'm spending my time on. Mm-hmm. And so I don't overwork. I always make time for Zuri. I don't take evening or weekend appointments. Maybe once every other week, I'll do an evening event. But I really have learned to say no. To your point at the very beginning of the podcast, learning to say no is probably one of the biggest gifts you can give yourself and others. Because when you learn to say no, the things that you say yes to, you're actually giving the best version of yourself. And then you're saying no to the things that don't serve you or aren't in alignment. And so that way you can free yourself to do the things that are most important to you.
I think that's fabulous. And I too color code because it's also a visual way to see when you're going out of balance, right?
Absolutely.
You know, are you spending too much time on volunteer? Are you spending too much time on work? I don't think any of us spend too much time on ourselves, but it could be possible. I don't have that problem. So for me, it's always trying to find ways to build that in. So I think that's great advice to work backwards to make sure that you're finding the time. And I chuckled when you said sleep, because I really feel like for most women, they're sleep deprived. And I had heard a statistic that if you have to wake up with an alarm clock, you're sleep deprived. And I chuckled and I said, well, and I've been sleep deprived since I'm 9 years old, but whatever. And I have found my window is 7 hours. If I sleep more than that, I always feel like I wake up with a backache. If I sleep less than that, I can function, but maybe not optimal. So I think to your point, there's a range and people need to figure out what works for them best. So,
but sleep helps us run our businesses better. We're, peak performance. It helps us maintain a healthy weight. It helps us. I mean, there's so many benefits to sleep. I could do a whole talk on sleeping.
Yes. And I think if people want to walk away with one thing around life balance and self-care, it's make sure you're getting enough sleep, because then you'll have the time to say, wow, I want to be doing these other things, right? Mm-hmm. If you're exhausted, then all the other things become harder, or you can't find your way to set boundaries. Like yourself, I've done some reevaluating and I am actually exiting 2 boards, and so that I can have some time to focus on other things that I want to do. And, time is also something that we need to have some boundaries on. And again, sometimes boards had a time and a place, and then it's time to move on. And so the people usually who are running those organizations don't want you to, but sometimes you just need to do that. And what I try to do is find my replacement, because it makes it easier to say I'm exiting, but oh, by the way, let me introduce you to someone who I think would be fabulous and bring some new ideas. Yeah. And that's saying no with a twist. That's what I call that. So, yeah. So we're winding down on time. I know the time, every time we talk goes so quickly, Whitney, but I do like to leave people with one piece of advice. So what would you offer as advice to our viewers or listeners today?
Well, there's one thing that you asked about retirement plans, so I wanted to mention this. The state of Minnesota is rolling out a program by January of 2025. If you have 5 or more employees, you have to provide a retirement plan. So this is huge. Like that, for people who don't offer a retirement plan, you have 5 or more employees, it's time to start shopping and work with a financial advisor to figure out what you should offer to your employees. So
and be planful about it.
Yes.
Yeah, be planful about it now before it becomes a stressor. This can be a great thing.
Exactly. And there are tax credits too. I mean, on the federal level, so you can actually get paid to start a retirement plan because of these tax credits. So it's just, I know we talked about a lot of different things, but since I didn't get to mention that earlier, I want to end on that note.
That's fabulous. I really appreciate you bringing that up because it gives people something to think about and some time to get ready for it, which, as we talked about, women like to have the information and do the planning and kind of move towards that in their own way. And so now they've got a couple years where they can do that. So
exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Whitney. That concludes our interview with Whitney Emanuel. And just a reminder, you can learn more about Whitney and her programs at whitneywealthgroup.com. And again, thanks for being here with us, Whitney. For those of you still on our call or listening in, don't forget to visit reginabarr.com, where you can learn more about our upcoming podcasts and other events on the event page. So with that, thank you all for joining us today and have a wonderful day.